three or four meta notes before getting into the actual content of the Seder, and I think these are pretty important. They're related to the expectations that you set for people in inviting them to your Seder. They relate to the physical space that you create for the Seder itself. They relate to the way that you introduce the Seder to people before you actually start doing anything. And then some general notes on leadership. So I want to talk about those four things before we actually get into any content of the Seder. So think about expectations. What I'd say about expectations is that they're very hard to change, but very easy to set. Meaning if someone shows up at your Seder and they've come in with a certain expectation of this is what a Seder is, or I don't know what a Seder is, and I'm assuming this is just going to be a quick Shabbat dinner, or this is going to be just a quick saying the prayers and then we eat. That's really hard to change on the spot. It's really hard to get people to change that expectation and then engage in meaningful conversation. But it's very easy when you're inviting someone to create the expectation that this is going to be an experience of meaningful conversation. And if you can kind of incept that ahead of time, then people have a week to let that marinate and then actually come with expecting that and ready to have that kind of conversation. So I feel there are a couple of ways to give people that expectation. One is when you're actually inviting people. If you haven't invited people, then this is a good thing to do as you invite them. If you have invited people, this is a good thing to do in a follow-up email or text or whatever that you send or talk to them about before the Seder, which I recommend, which is ask people to bring a meaningful idea with them to share. It doesn't have to be something that is super steeped in Jewish education, but any kind of Passover experience, memory that they have, anything that you can do to set people with the idea that we're going to actually talk about meaningful things. It's not just a quick Shabbat dinner. I also have asked people to bring an object with them that we then use as tell them someone else is going to get this object and they'll have to connect that back to Passover somehow. And again, just something that okay, now instead of just showing up at your door, I need to bring something. It'll be easy for me to bring, but I'll have to think about that, and somehow I'll have thought about the Seder before just walking in the door. And I think that helps a lot. I also want to
have an object just as an example.
Just anything super random. People just bring just really random things, like a bottle opener. I don't know, it could be anything, and then tell them that someone else is gonna have to connect this back to the story, and so they can get creative with it. Again, the goal is just to get someone to think about it before showing up. The other thing that I have done is when I invite people, I think this is pretty important, to say something along the lines of, this is going to be something where I think that we will end up sitting around talking for a while, and though I'd love for you to come for as long as you can, if you could clear your night so that you can just sit around talking with us and chilling over some wine if you want to, I think that would be a really nice experience. So just giving people the idea that oh, okay, we're going to be sitting and talking. A lot of people show up just expecting basically a Shabbat, a modified Shabbat dinner with some prayers before. And also maybe telling people to eat a late lunch the day of, especially if you're leading a Seder on the second night and starting it on the later side, so that people can be engaged in conversation and not just super hungry the whole time.
Did you mention that there was an idea of you said serve a big salad during
the
Karpas portion?
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about that. I think that's a huge thing. In terms of the physical space that you set up, I'm a big believer in the space and the ambiance of an environment dictating to a certain degree what the experience is going to be like for people. And I think being really intentional beforehand, not just going with the space that you're given. If you're hosting in Hillel, not just showing up into the room and being okay, this is what we're going to do, but thinking about, okay, is there something we can do with the lighting before? Is there something we can put on the table? Is there something we can do with the arrangement of the room or the chairs to make this more intimate?
If we're hosting in Hillel, we get the free dance.
Yeah, well, I'll talk to you about the room that you'll have, and we'll talk about things that we can do with the rooms. I was thinking about changing the lighting around, bringing floor lamps in instead of the overhead lights. If you're hosting at home or wherever you're hosting, I think the ideal in my mind is that there should be super comfortable seating. Last year we took out all the chairs from my living room and just used the sofa cushions on the floor and up against the walls as backrests, so that it was just everyone really lounging around. And I think that works really well to get people in the mindset of like, we're chilling, we're having a meaningful conversation. Like this is comfortable and not like a stiff, like sitting at a table experience. I'm still thinking about at Hillel, like how I can do that for the Seder that I'm leading, like how I can make it more comfortable. And if anyone has ideas, I would love to hear that. But I think that lighting is like a very important aspect. I think that if you come into a room that has like harsh overhead bright lighting, I don't know, there's something about the contrast of that with like dim lighting that is like, I don't know, I last year like used my like white Christmas lights around the perimeter and like candles on the table, and that just sets a vibe of like, oh, this is nice, like, this is not harsh and intimidating. Also, if possible, like giving people line of sight around the table, so that there's not like needing to like look all the way down to be able to see someone, or like a part that curves around where no one can see anyone that's like stuck in the corner. Ideally, like that there's some air of circleness, I think is ideal. I would say just having like minimal literature on the table to start. Even like maybe not the Haggadahs at each setting, maybe just like having the Haggadahs like in a stack somewhere. And if you have other things like printed out that you want to share people articles to read or something, I think like not distributing those at the beginning. Whenever I go into like a class or a session and there's like source sheets distributed at the beginning, I'm already just have the feeling of like, oh, this is sort of sheets. I don't know. And I feel like just to be able to come in, and I would say maybe like, I think last year I didn't even do table settings, and just to create the air of like, there's not like we're waiting for the meal and like we'll just do some quick talking before the meal, but like we're sitting around the table chatting, and then at some point there's also going to be food, which is like implied. But not having the settings there, I think, helps create the expectation that there's going to be talking first, and also like, that makes people less anxious to be like when are we eating? Just looking at your plate. Is there any questions on like the physical setup?
What would you recommend that we do if we have people who might be showing up like partly Seder?
Cool. That's a very good segue. Before even that, like what will definitely happen is that people will show up within the first 10 minutes. Like not everyone, if the Seder is starting at 7:30, not everyone's showing up at 7:30, of course. Like people are going to show up between like 7:30 and 7:45. So I think you decide beforehand, like on your start time, and then do something in those first 10 minutes when there's like the mulling about and people just walking in, where like the first two people that get there that don't know each other don't have to like awkwardly just come up with a conversation and have small talk, and then the third person comes in and they like also are stuck in the small talk. I don't know, an idea that I had was to like, if you have paper tablecloth that you're using, like to draw a puzzle game or something on it beforehand with like whatever accessories are involved, so people can come in and do that. Like it's like solving a puzzle, or I don't know, be creative. But I thought that something like that could be cool. Or like putting question cards out at each place setting, like icebreaker kind of questions or discussion topics. But I feel like having something that like in those first 15 minutes to let people engage with each other and not just be like, not have that like intimate conversation feeling. In terms of people showing up, and were you talking about like more?
Yeah, like we
further
have
in?
like a few people who are saying like, oh, like I want to show up around like 9. Is that okay? 9:30.
Yeah, I think that as long as like that's not like a plurality, I think that works. Like if it's like people trickling in, like that's cool, that's fine. It doesn't like change the energy. But if there's like, I feel like if there was one time when like 5 people showed up, like you would maybe want to avoid that, because then there's like this like big energy change that happens and like this whole new group that's like missed icebreakers and stuff. So I guess that would be like, I guess encouraging most people to try to be there at the time. But and even if there are going to be 5 people, like I would just, my hesitation would be like if there was a group of 5. But like if individual people are like trickling in, I feel like that's fine, because it doesn't change the energy that much. I think that like as you move forward and like get people to quiet down, I think like just in every moment there is an opportunity to set the tone. So when you're getting people to quiet down to like start whatever you're going to start next, like doing it with a vibe of whatever you want the vibe of the rest of the Seder to be. So if you're like yelling and like trying to get order, like it will set that tone. And if you're doing it in like a like relaxed way, it'll set a relaxed tone. Just like whatever you say there will kind of, I think everything you do sets the tone going forward. I think my recommendation is to go straight from like when you feel like you have a quorum to singing the like Kaddish or Chatz table of contents of the Seder, and just like saying that you're going to do that, and then singing it, so that like doing that before icebreakers, so that everyone is like, okay, it's like starting now, we're in it, and then you're going to do icebreakers, rather than like, because icebreakers could like go many different ways. So getting like having the feeling like, okay, we're in the Seder now, now we're going to meet each other, I think is valuable. After singing Kaddish or Chatz, I would say that it's like a really good opportunity to talk about why do we do a table of contents before we start the Seder. A big reason I think we do it, and that could be a point of conversation, it could also be just something an idea that you share. A big reason I think we do it is that the goal is to make the Seder as accessible as possible. I think you want to like share with people from the outset that like my goal in creating this experience is to make it as like accessible and comfortable for all of us here coming from such different backgrounds, and some of us like having our first time at a Seder experience. And sharing the idea that like that is the idea of a Seder, is like a shared experience where everyone, where it caters to the level that everyone is on, like the background that everyone has. And so starting with a table of contents is like a great way to say like, okay, here's what we're going to be doing, and setting the tone going forward that like at each stage we're going to be clear about like what we're doing. I also think it's a really good opportunity to start with the why, like talk about why you're having a Seder. And this doesn't need to be something like, this is not like why one has a Seder. I think it's a good opportunity to talk about like why you decided to have a Seder, and like why you decided to invite these people. Just like be really candid about like what you're trying to do here and like what your goal is for the night, without sounding too agendaed, but like that you're trying to create a meaningful experience, and not and like being transparent about that, like getting people invested and like, cool, okay, like I want to be on board with that. Like that sounds interesting, meaningful, and like I appreciate that you want me to be a part of that. And I think at that point is like a good time to move into an icebreaker. Like you've kind of said, okay, like this is what we're doing, this is why we're here, and like now let's like get to know each other a little bit. I think the icebreaker shouldn't be like anything too long, because there's going to be so many opportunities for people to speak and introduce themselves again and share something that they want to share. But just something where people can like say their names at the beginning and maybe like share a Passover memory, or if this is their first time doing anything related to Passover, like sharing what their expectation was coming into this, or like what they like associated Passover with in the past if they've heard of it. Just like something to like get things going. Before getting into the like actual content, the meat of it, I think just like a few notes on leadership. This is stuff that I've heard from like a lot of different places, including from Rabbi Mike. I think it's like the biggest thing you can do is like take ownership of this experience that you're creating, and that manifests itself in a bunch of different ways. So I think the first thing is to realize that like you're leading this, and it's not the Haggadah that's leading this. Like you're not following the Haggadah's lead to be like, okay, what's the first thing that we're doing here, and then like proceeding accordingly. I think you want to give the vibe of like, I will use the Haggadah as my aid, but I am the one setting the tone. I am the one like taking the first step at each point in the Seder. And that's like, I think for the majority of the Seders that we're talking about here, the goal is definitely not to read through every portion of the Haggadah. I think the goal is to use the Haggadah as a jumping off point for different parts of conversation, and that like you have those points in your mind, the points that you would like to have conversation around, and then like reference those when relevant in the Haggadah. So that people also feel like, okay, we're not like following this book. We have like a narrative and a momentum of our own, and like this book is being used as like a reference tool. And I think for anyone that like cares about the like halacha, which I don't know that much about, of like reading every word of the Haggadah, like you can very easily do that in the first 10 minutes of the meal, and like or like at the beginning when everyone's doing icebreaker, like someone, if there are people at your Seder that care to read through every word, I think that you can like share with them that there's an opportunity to do that before you start or during the meal, so like read through it. And that should allow you to feel more free to like create your own narrative or like the points that you want to focus on. I think like singing the major songs is good and valuable, and it's like a fun experience, even if not everyone knows them, but like being transparent about the fact that like, not everyone's going to know this, but this is like a very classic song from like the Passover Seder, and I think it'd be nice to sing. And I think what you want to do like beforehand is identify the points in the Haggadah that have the questions that you would like to use as jumping off points. So like note those, note the page numbers, and then mostly like be working off of your own notes to go through it. In terms of like how to ask questions, I think the goal is a balance between questions that are open-ended and questions that are answerable. Like if you take a question that's like super open-ended, like no one knows what to do with that. And so I think you want to ask a question that is open-ended that can be answered in like a universal way, but where like maybe you give it some form and structure, or like you give like the beginning of the way that you've thought about it. Like I don't know, I started thinking about it in this way, like maybe it has this meaning, but I'm wondering if anyone else has like a thought on like what the answer to this question is. And I think like while people are talking about the question, you don't want to like make it seem like you're waiting to give your spiel until everyone's done. Like, and you don't want to, when you actually do, if you want to, like give some concluding thoughts, you want to be very careful to not be like, yeah, okay, cool. So what that means is, and then like give your answer, like everyone else. Like I think like we've all had like professors that sort of do that. Like we're gonna have a discussion. Okay, that was like cute what you all said. Now here's what the real thing is. And I think it's like really important to avoid that and to like genuinely like lend validity to what everyone is sharing. I think also like in the same vein, you don't want to have the vibe of like there's an answer to this question, like who can get it. Like I think that's like professors sometimes do that to like get engagement, like like a trivial question. It's like who knows the answer to this, and I don't think anyone enjoys that, and I don't think it makes anyone feel like good about their contribution. One like very practical thing is when you ask a question, like you finish the way that you want to phrase the question. People, when they ask a question, I think are very afraid to let any silence happen. Like there's 2 seconds of silence, and then you want to like rephrase the question or like say something else. But I read about research that, and Leslie shared this with me, that like you need to wait 9 seconds or something in that order after you ask a question for people to like hear the question, internalize it, process what you mean by that, and then come up with a thought that they are comfortable sharing with everyone. So like being okay with a little bit of silence, even though it'll feel a little uncomfortable, and you can be transparent about that. You can like ask a question and then maybe just like in a self-aware way say like I heard this thing where you need to like wait a little bit after you ask a question for people to process. So we'll do that throughout. And in general, like if someone says something good, like I find like the best like seminar teachers that I've had are able to take what someone said that maybe not everyone understood or maybe not everyone related to, but like can be like, oh great, that's really interesting. So you mean that, and like then just summarizing maybe what they said if they like went in a bunch of different places, summarizing what they said so everyone can be like, that everyone can click with it, and then someone else can maybe say something that they think about that. But once they've like understood it, so you've taken what someone said and turned it into something like relatable for everyone without negating it all with what the first person said. I think then when there is a focus on asking questions and making them open-ended to engage everyone, there's also like balancing that with the fact that people do want to come to learn things that you have thought about, like to learn about meaning, like aspects of Judaism, this experience, the ideas behind it that are meaningful to you. And I think like I don't know, my like personal pedagogical style is like not to completely leave it open to discussion, but to like also share some ideas, because like I sat and thought about this a bunch before and came up with like some meaningful ways to think about this. And I think don't like hesitate to share those, because I think people are a lot of the time coming to like hear what you have to say and not just to like hear a discussion about what everyone else has to say about this. I think people want to learn about the tradition behind this, or like why it's meaningful. And when you're doing that, I think it's important to like avoid any talk of like obligation, like, oh, we do this thing because like we're commanded to. I think that it's important for you to like own the experience, like own the meaning behind the tradition, and not present anything as like, oh, this is because this is tradition, which sounds like trivial, but like I think a lot of times people explain things that way. Like that's why, I don't know, we do this because like that. There's a tradition to do this, and that just makes it sound like hands off. Like I don't know, there's this thing, but I don't really identify with it. Whereas like I think you want to like talk about and do like what's meaningful for you. And if there is something in the procession that has not been made meaningful for you yet, or like you haven't found meaningful, this is a really good opportunity to explore like what could be meaningful about it for you. So then you can then share that with someone else and explain like how that could be meaningful to them. In order to like create a culture of questioning at the Seder, I think it's like important to be forthcoming about the fact that you want there to be questions, that this is like a holiday and an experience of questions, and that Judaism is in a lot of way a religion of questions, and that we balance the fact that like we have a tradition with the fact that it's alive and like we are exploring it and trying to figure it out still and probing at it, and we ask questions because like we don't understand, not just because like we have like, oh, it would be interesting if I said this, but like legitimately I just don't get this. Like this just doesn't make sense to me. And I think that like encouraging people to come at it from that perspective, not just asking like intellectual questions where you're like making a statement and then asking a question, but like actually like, wait, I just don't get this. I think like encouraging that is really great. It makes people feel a lot more comfortable and helps people engage with what's going on a lot more. And I think the question of why we question is also one that's valuable to discuss before like getting into things. And for me, part of the reason is because like Judaism aims to be a framework to make your life as meaningful as possible, and that like framework, like the frame only works if you understand the meaning behind what you're doing. And so just doing the things that you're supposed to do because you're supposed to do them, like doesn't allow you to have a meaningful experience. And I think encouraging people to engage with that, to engage with the idea that like I'm not just gonna do this, or like I shouldn't just like take this as a given. Like why would I do that? Like why would that be meaningful for me? And I think like in a real way, in a genuine way. I think it's, like the Seder is often like let's ask questions, like let's ask the classical questions, like the holiday questioning. And I think it's actually an opportunity for like real, like difficult, theological, traditional, like tradition questioning questions. So like encourage that, like be forthcoming with people about the fact that they should challenge what's going on and like really ask questions that are bothering them. Like one way that I've shared that with people is to say that like, okay, like I have these ideas prepared, I've thought a lot about this, but I would love nothing more than like not to get through all the ideas I have because we're just engaging in such genuine questions. Like that would be great for me. I would love that happen with the Seder. Okay. Before getting into the meat of it, does anyone have any thoughts or questions so far? I'll give 9 seconds.
I was thinking about one thing. It's 2 questions. Number 1, when you're hosting with someone else, do you suggest having one person be the leader? You can answer that.
That's a good question. I think it really depends on the personalities. I think there are times when balance works really well, when like you really can just play off of each other. And I think there are times where it's sort of like it's faked. Like it's very obvious that one person is the more dominant leader, but that person is trying very hard to like create an equal dynamic. And there's this feeling like I think it gets a little bit uncomfortable. And so like I think that if there's like a really equal dynamic, then like I think that's cool to play off each other. And beforehand, like have set out the things that you want to talk about and who's gonna like take the lead on different parts while still being organic, obviously, and like letting it go where it goes. I actually think in both situations you should have that kind of set out beforehand. that even if someone is like a less strong leader, that like it's clear for them like which parts they're going to own, which parts the other person is going to own, and then you don't have that weird like tension of like, hey, do that, do your part now. Does that make sense?
Yeah. The second question / comment was about like your analogy to seminars, and I always hated when it seems like a teacher and a student have a conversation like back and forth to each other, and I was wondering if you had any tips about how to balance as a leader, like responding or rephrasing what someone has to say, but making sure that the conversation is not just between you.
Right. Yeah, I think it's hard. I think that like spitting things out, like meaning someone directs a question directly at you, you're engaging with it, but letting like the way you finish with that question be something like putting it out there to everyone. Like you can respond to them and then like have your next point be like the second half of your response to them be something that is like phrased out to everyone, which is like hard to do, but I think is definitely doable. You can get out of that like. Anything else? Okay, cool. I didn't wait 9 seconds. Okay, so going into Kadesh, first part of the Seder. I think that like first thing I want to say is like a template for every part of the Seder that I think should ideally be followed. Where like in each section of the Seder, you're clear about like what's the form, what's the content, and what's the meaning. So like the form, like what are we like practically, physically going to like do right now? Like what's flying? Because there are going to be people there that like really don't know, any people that have been to a Seder before, like just to like have your bearings, like the things that we take for granted, having like been to and hosted and done Seders before, like to be clear about those things. Okay, like this is like practically what we're going to do now, and then the content, like this is what we are saying in this thing, or like this is like what this thing has associated with it, and then like